My son asked me to co-sign a loan on a Sunday afternoon in October, and I told him I needed a week to think about it. Not because I needed a week. I am 66 years old and I have been making financial decisions since I was 22, which means I could have given him an answer in about 4 seconds. I told him a week because something in the way he asked made me want to look at the question from more angles before I committed to an answer, the way a structural engineer walks around a foundation before he signs off on it regardless of how confident he feels standing at one end. He said of course take all the time you need, and he hugged me at the door and told me he appreciated me thinking it over, and he drove home. That night I heard him through the wall of the guest room where I was staying at his house. His voice and his wife's voice, the low registers of two people who think the house is quieter than it is, which it was not, because old houses in October in Central Virginia let sound travel in ways that surprise the people who have not lived in them as long as I have. He said, "He'll sign. He always does. And once he does we move the rest into our name." I lay in the guest room bed in the dark and I listened to the silence that followed that sentence, and then I listened to his wife say something I could not quite catch, and then I heard him say, "The account numbers are already drafted. I just need his signature on the cosign and the rest follows from there." I had not agreed to anything. He always does. I lay in the dark for a long time thinking about those 3 words. He always does. Not I hope he will, not I think he will, not even I believe he will. He always does. A statement about a pattern. About a man who had been signing things and agreeing to things and absorbing the costs of his son's decisions for long enough that the signing had become something his son could count on. And always. I thought about how long always takes to build. I thought about the 23 years of being the person who showed up when his son needed something to be signed, and the 23 years of believing that the signing was love and not just convenience. And I thought about the rest of the sentence and what the rest into our name meant, and I started building a list in my head in the dark guest room of a house where my son was sleeping comfortably because he already knew how the week was going to end. The next morning I woke at 5:30, got dressed quietly, went to the kitchen, made myself coffee from his machine and sat at his kitchen table. At 6:15 I picked up my phone and made one call. He did not wake up until 7:40. By the time he came downstairs the call was already done, and everything he thought he had already won was not what he thought it was anymore. Welcome to True Family Story. Hit that like button, drop a comment telling me where you are watching from, and let's get into it. My name is Bernard Collier. I am 66 years old and I live in Charlottesville, Virginia, on a street called Sycamore Hill Lane in a brick colonial that my late wife Frances and I bought in 1993 and which has been mine alone since she passed in 2019, 4 years ago now. 4 years that have taught me things about solitude and attention that 33 years of a good marriage did not need to teach me because they were covered by the marriage itself. I built an insurance brokerage called Collier Financial Group in 1984, which is the kind of business that sounds unremarkable until you understand what it actually requires, which is a combination of precision and people skills that most businesses require separately but insurance requires simultaneously, because you are selling someone the accurate accounting of their risk at the same time you are sitting across from their anxiety about that risk and managing both things at once for every client you have. I sold the firm in 2020, the year after Frances died, because running it without her was like running it with one eye closed, and I had spent 35 years keeping both eyes open and was not going to pretend I could do otherwise. The sale was good. Frances would have said it was more than good. She would have said it was overdue and that I should have sold 3 years earlier when the first good offer came in, and that my attachment to the business was the same as my attachment to everything I had built, which was slightly past reasonable and into the category of things you hold long enough that you forget you are holding them. She was right, as she usually was, and I sold a year after she was gone instead of 3 years before she died, which is not the version of events I would have written if I had been given the choice. My son Robert is 42. He lives in Roanoke, 2 hours southwest of Charlottesville, with his wife Denise and their daughter, who is 9 and is named Frances after her grandmother, which was Robert's idea and which I have always taken as evidence that Robert has more in him than what I am about to tell you suggests. Because a man who names his daughter after his grandmother is a man who understands that love has a shape, even if he does not always live inside that shape consistently. Robert works in commercial development, a field that rewards confidence and punishes overcaution and which has, over the years, produced in my son a particular relationship with risk that I recognize from his professional life without always seeing it clearly in his personal decisions because the professional and personal versions look different enough that I had not finished drawing the line between them. My daughter, Renata, is 39. She lives in Richmond, an hour east, teaches at a community college, calls me on Tuesday and Saturday mornings because she decided those were the mornings and has kept that decision for 6 years without deviation. She has Frances's laugh, the specific pitched laugh that happens when something surprises Renata into genuine amusement, and every time I hear it on the phone I have a second of something that is grief and gratitude at the same time, the particular double register of loving someone who carries the sound of someone you lost. Renata had been telling me for 2 years not about Robert specifically, but about a pattern she had noticed, that the calls from Robert happen with more frequency around moments when Robert needed something to happen, and with less frequency in the intervals between those moments. She had said it once, clearly, on a Tuesday morning when I mentioned that Robert and I had spoken twice that week, both times initiated by Robert, both times ending with a request for my professional opinion on a development deal he was considering. She had said, "Dad, just noticed the timing," and I had noted it and filed it and had not quite done what she was suggesting I do with it, which was to draw a conclusion from the noticing. I drew the conclusion the Sunday Robert asked me to co-sign. He had come to Charlottesville on the pretense of a weekend visit, which it was. Genuinely, there was a dinner and a walk on the Saturday and a Sunday morning at the farmer's market Francis had loved, and those things were real and I do not want to say they were not. Robert can be genuinely present when he chooses to be, and the Saturday was a Saturday where he chose to be, and I was glad for it. The Sunday afternoon was when the visit became something else. He sat across from me at the kitchen table with the specific posture of a man who has been building toward a question for 2 days and is finally arriving at it. He said there was something he had been wanting to talk to me about. He said a development opportunity had come up in Roanoke, a mixed-use project, office and retail on a lot that had been undervalued for years and which the current market had brought back to a point where the numbers worked. He said the bank required a co-signer on the construction loan, given the size of the project, and that he wanted to ask if I would consider it. The loan amount was $400,000. I said I needed a week to think about it. He said of course. He hugged me at the door that evening when he left to drive back to Roanoke, and I noticed he was staying the night instead of driving, that he had planned to use the guest room, and I said of course and showed him to it and went to bed at 9 because I am 66 years old and I go to bed at 9 when I am at home and I go to bed at 9 when I am not, because Francis always said that a man who cannot keep his schedule when his circumstances change is a man who has no schedule at all and is just a man who goes to bed when things get quiet. Things were not quiet at 10:15. Robert and Denise spoke on the phone for about 20 minutes, the first 15 of which I mostly could not hear clearly because they were managing their voices and old houses carry sound selectively. It was the last 5 minutes that were clearer, and it was in those 5 minutes that he said the things that changed the week I had told him he had. He'll sign. He always does. The account numbers are already drafted. The rest into our name. I want to take you through those phrases the way I took myself through them in the dark, because each one is a different shape of the same thing and understanding the shapes is how I built what came next. He'll sign. He always does. This was a statement about history. About the pattern of my yes across 23 years of being the father who solved the problem, absorbed the cost, co-signed the thing. He had built an expectation from that pattern, which is what patterns do when you do not interrupt them at the right time, they become predictions. The account numbers are already drafted. This was not about the cosign loan. This was about something after the cosign loan, something that required account numbers, something that was prepared before he had my answer because he did not need my answer to prepare it. A man who has the account numbers drafted before the ink is dry on the loan he has not yet gotten is a man who is moving on a timeline that does not account for the possibility of no. The rest into our name. This was the sentence that stopped me completely in the dark. Not the cosign. Not the $400,000 loan. The rest. The rest of what? The rest of what a 66-year-old retired insurance broker with a sold firm and a paid-off house and 23 years of co-signing things had accumulated, which Robert apparently knew the shape of in enough detail to refer to it as the rest. I did not have exact clarity in that moment about what the rest into our name meant mechanically. I had very clear clarity about what it meant in plain language, which is that my son was not asking for a co-sign on a development loan. He was using a co-sign on a development loan as the first signature in a sequence that he had already mapped out and that ended with a material portion of my assets in his name and his wife's name before I had understood what I had started by signing. I got up at 5:30. I dressed. I made coffee. I sat at the kitchen table in the blue-gray dark of a Virginia October morning and I thought about what Renata had told me on a Tuesday, just noticed the timing, and I thought about Francis saying a man who cannot keep his schedule is a man with no schedule, and I thought about 23 years of always and what it had made me to my son, and I thought about what I needed to do next. At 6:15 I called Renata. She answered on the first ring. It was a Saturday, which was one of her calling mornings, and she heard something in the sound of my breathing before I said anything. She said, "Dad, what is wrong?" I told her everything. The Sunday afternoon. The loan request. The week I had said I needed. The 10:15 phone call through the wall of the guest room. All of it, in order, with the specific phrases repeated back as exactly as I had them. She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "He always does." "Yes," I said. "He said that," she said. "About you." "Yes." Another moment of quiet. Then she said, in the voice she uses when she has thought something through completely and is giving me the finished version rather than the process, "Dad, you need to call Jeffrey before Robert wakes up." Jeffrey Marsh was my attorney. He had handled the sale of the firm, had handled Francis's estate, had handled every significant legal moment of my adult life since 1995 and knew my affairs more completely than any other single person. Renata knew his name because she was Renata, and Renata knew the names you needed before you needed them. I was already thinking Jeffrey, I said. "Call him now," she said. "Not after breakfast. Now." I called Jeffrey at 6:22. He picked up on the fourth ring with the voice of a man who has been practicing law long enough that an early Saturday call does not alarm him but does make him pay immediate attention. I told him what I had heard. Not the loan request, I would get to that, but the specific sentences from the wall of the guest room. "He'll sign. He always does. The account numbers are already drafted. The rest into our name." Jeffrey was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "Bernard, before we talk about the loan, I need to ask you something. In the last year, have you signed anything involving Robert that you did not read completely? Any financial authorization, any account update, anything he brought to you as routine paperwork?" I thought about it. In August, Robert had been in Charlottesville for 3 days helping me address some drainage issues in the backyard, which needed a contractor, and Robert had connections and had managed the whole thing, which I had appreciated. On the last day, he had brought me a stack of paperwork from the contractor and said there was a form I needed to sign confirming I was the property owner authorizing the work. I had signed it without reading it fully because it was August and I had been outside all day, and the form was at the bottom of a stack and Robert had pointed to the line. I told Jeffrey this. He said, "Do you still have that stack of papers?" "I think so," I said. "In the file drawer in my study." "I need you to find it this morning," he said. "Before Robert is awake if possible. Look at everything you signed and read it completely this time." "All right," I said. "And Bernard," he said, "this is important. Do not mention this conversation to Robert this morning. Go about your day as normally as you can. I am going to make some calls." "On a Saturday?" I said. "On a Saturday," Jeffrey said, with the specific calm of a man who has been making Saturday calls his entire professional life and does not consider them unusual. "I will call you back by 10. I went to the study. The file drawer was where it always was, the second drawer on the left of the desk Francis had picked out in 1998 at an antique market in Staunton, a walnut secretary desk that she had loved for its compartments, which she said were the right size for things that needed to be put somewhere specific rather than somewhere general. I pulled out the August contractor stack and I sat at the desk and I read every page. The contractor authorization form was on page 4. I had signed at the bottom of page 4. The form was one page front and back, and I had signed the front, and the back was what I had not looked at. On the back, in a font slightly smaller than the front but still legible, was a second authorization section headed Financial Coordination Authorization for Property Services Account. The language said that by signing the front of this document, the property owner authorized the named service coordinator, which was listed as Collier Property Management LLC, to access the property's associated financial accounts for the purpose of invoice processing and payment coordination. Collier Property Management LLC. I had never heard of Collier Property Management LLC. My name was Collier. The LLC had my name in it. And I had apparently, on a hot day in August at the bottom of a contractor stack, authorized it to access my financial accounts. I sat at Francis's desk with the paper in my hands and I breathed very carefully for about 30 seconds. Then I went back to the kitchen and I refreshed my coffee and I sat at the table and I waited. Robert came down at 7:40 with the ease of a man who has slept well because he knows how the week is going to end. He said good morning. He asked how I had slept. I said fine. He made himself coffee and sat across from me and we talked about the Saturday, about the farmer's market, about a vendor we had both noticed who had an unusual display of late-season squash, the kind of ordinary conversation that two people can have across a kitchen table when one of them does not know that the other one has been in the study and the contractor file and on the phone with Jeffrey since 6:15. I asked if he wanted eggs. He said he would love eggs. I made eggs. We ate. Robert talked about the Roanoke project with the easy confidence of a man who believes the cosign is already secured and is describing the project in the present tense rather than the conditional because the present tense is how things sound when they are already decided. At 8:45 my phone rang. "Jeffrey." I looked at the screen. I said, I need to take this. Give me a few minutes. Robert nodded the comfortable nod of a man who is not concerned about who his father is talking to on a Saturday morning. I went to the study and closed the door. Jeffrey said, I have found Collier Property Management LLC. It was registered in Virginia in July of this year, 2 months before you signed the contractor authorization. The registered agent is a woman named Denise Collier, Robert's wife. The financial coordination authorization on the back of that contractor form, Jeffrey said, combined with the LLC registration, gives Denise Collier's company a basis to request access to financial accounts associated with your name and your property address. It is not a power of attorney, but it is a first step toward a documentation trail that could be used to argue that you had given authorization for financial coordination, which combined with subsequent steps could be used to move accounts or assets under the umbrella of coordinating your financial affairs. What subsequent steps? I said. That is what I am trying to determine, Jeffrey said. The account numbers Robert mentioned last night suggest there is a specific account or accounts he has already identified as the target. I want you to check your investment accounts and your savings accounts today, all of them, and tell me if anything has changed in the last 2 months that you did not initiate yourself. Any new beneficiary designations, any new linked accounts, any correspondence you may have received that you did not act on. How long will this take? I said. I need 48 hours to file the appropriate protections, Jeffrey said. The LLC registration can be challenged on the basis of the fraudulent authorization obtained by misrepresentation, which is what happened when Robert handed you that contractor stack and directed you to a signature line without disclosing the back of the document. I am also going to recommend that we file an emergency protective order on your investment accounts that prevents any third-party access without your written authorization independently verified. Do it, I said. I will need you to come to my office Monday morning, he said, before Robert has had a chance to take any further steps. I will be there, I said. And Bernard, Jeffrey said. Whatever you do this morning, do not sign anything Robert presents to you. Not the cosign, not any form, not anything that has a signature line on it. If he presents something, tell him you are still thinking and you will let him know. Understood, I said. I stood in Francis's study for a moment with the phone in my hand. The walnut secretary desk was in the corner. The contractor stack was still on the surface where I had left it, page 4 face down. Then I went back to the kitchen. Robert was washing the egg pan, which he sometimes did, one of the unrequested small gestures that made the larger picture complicated to hold in a single frame. He heard me come in and said without turning around, "Everything okay?" "Fine," I said. "Old friend checking in." He nodded and finished the pan. We spent the morning in the ordinary way of a Sunday in Charlottesville in October, which if you have never been here in October is a particular kind of morning that makes you understand why people have been coming to this part of Virginia since before it was Virginia, the light and the color and the specific temperature of a fall that has not yet committed to cold. We walked around the block. We had a second cup of coffee on the porch. Robert talked about Roanoke and his daughter Frances and a school project she was doing on Virginia history, which she had called him about the previous week and which he described with the specific pride of a father who is surprised every time by how much his child surprises him. He was a good father. I want to say that clearly because this story is not about Robert being a bad person. It is about a man who had learned a pattern from his father's consistency and had decided to use the pattern in a direction it was never designed to go, and who had, somewhere in the planning of that use, built a structure that required misrepresentation and had not stopped to ask himself what that meant about what he was doing. At noon he brought up the cosign again. Gently, not pushing, a gentle reminder that he wanted to make sure I had what I needed to feel comfortable with the decision. I said I was still thinking about it and I would let him know by the end of the week as we had discussed. He said of course, absolutely, take all the time I needed. He left at 2. I walked him to his car. He hugged me at the driver's door and said it had been a great weekend and he loved me and I said I loved him too, and both of us meant it, and both of us were also not saying things that were going to need to be said soon, and we both knew it, though only one of us knew exactly what those things were going to be. I went inside. I sat in Frances's chair in the living room, the wingback by the window she had always sat in, and I looked at the October afternoon and I thought about 23 years of always and what I was going to do about it. If you are still with me, drop a comment below. Hit that like button. Because Monday morning is where this story earns everything it has been building toward. Jeffrey's office was on the downtown mall in Charlottesville, a building that had been on that block since the 1920s and which had the specific gravity of a place that had handled serious things for a long time and expected to continue doing so. I arrived at 8:45 Monday morning, 15 minutes early, which Jeffrey had been expecting because he had been my attorney for 28 years and knew that I arrived early to things that mattered. He had 2 other people in the room when I came in. A woman named Sandra Cole, who was a forensic accountant his office worked with on estate matters, and a man named Paul Whitmore, who Jeffrey introduced as a specialist in financial fraud involving family members, which told me that Jeffrey had spent his Saturday and Sunday making calls and had decided this was serious enough to bring in people. It was serious enough to bring in people. Sandra Cole had spent the weekend pulling together everything available through public records and the documentation I had photographed and sent to Jeffrey on Saturday after finding the contractor file. She had a 14-page summary on the table when I sat down, which was a lot of pages for 2 days of work, and which told me she had not spent the weekend doing anything else. The summary contained the following. Collier Property Management LLC, registered July of this year with Denise Collier as the registered agent, had been used to open a business account at a regional bank in Roanoke in August, the same month as the contractor authorization. The account had been opened with a nominal deposit and had remained essentially inactive since opening, which Sandra said was consistent with an account created to receive funds rather than to operate a business. The financial coordination authorization on the contractor form had been used, in September, to send a letter to my brokerage on Collier Property Management letterhead requesting account summary documentation for the purpose of coordinating financial services, which was the language from the contractor authorization reproduced on the LLC letterhead. The brokerage had responded with a form letter indicating that account information could only be released with a formal written authorization from the account holder, which had stopped the September attempt. They were going to try again, Sandra said. The cosign is almost certainly the vehicle for the next attempt. A cosigner on a construction loan has certain legal access to documentation about the primary borrower's financial position, for the purpose of assessing the cosigner's liability exposure. If you had signed the cosign, Robert's attorneys could have used that relationship to request documentation of your financial position in ways that a stranger could not. And from that documentation, Jeffrey said, they would have had the account numbers and the institution names, which are what Robert referenced when he said the account numbers are already drafted. The account numbers are already drafted. They did not have them yet. The September brokerage letter had stopped that step. The cosign was supposed to be the next step that got them there. How close did they get? I said. Sandra looked at her summary. The September letter got a form response. They did not get any account information. The account numbers Robert referenced are probably anticipated rather than actual. He knows approximately what you have and where you have it from years of proximity to your financial decisions, but he does not have the specific account numbers yet. So nothing has moved, I said. Nothing has moved, Jeffrey said. Which is why the next 48 hours matter. We filed the protective orders today, which frees any third-party access to your accounts pending a formal authorization process. We filed the challenge to the LLC registration based on the fraudulent authorization. And we document the full sequence, the contractor form, the September letter, the Saturday night conversation, so that the record is clear and complete before Robert or Denise takes any further step. The Saturday night conversation, I said. Do I have documentation of that? Your testimony is documentation, Jeffrey said. You were present. You heard it. You can attest to it. Combined with the written evidence of the LLC, the account, and the September letter, the conversation is corroborating context rather than the primary evidence. He looked at me. Bernard, I want to be clear about something. What Robert and Denise have done rises to the level of criminal fraud in Virginia. The contractor form misrepresentation, the LLC opened under false pretenses, the September letter using a fraudulently obtained authorization. I am obligated to tell you that this is prosecutable. I know, I said. Do you want to pursue that? He said. I sat with that question. I had been sitting with it since Saturday morning, since the dark guest room, since the coffee at the kitchen table and the eggs in the October walk around the block. I had been sitting with it through Robert's Sunday afternoon ease and the hug at the driver's door and the I love you that was real even inside everything else that was also real. He named his daughter Frances. That was still true. That had not changed. I want the protections, I said. I want the LLC challenged and dissolved and the fraudulent authorization revoked from the record. I want the accounts protected and my estate documents updated so there are no gaps that a second attempt could use. I paused. I do not want to file criminal charges. Not today. I want to tell Robert what I know and what has been done, and I want to give him the opportunity to understand what he nearly did before I decide whether the criminal filing is the right response. Jeffrey looked at me. And if he does not respond in a way that earns that restraint? Then we file, I said. but I want to have the conversation first. All right, Jeffrey said. Then we file the protections today and you have the conversation when you are ready. The protections were filed by Thursday. The LLC challenge was filed alongside them. Sandra's documentation of the full sequence was part of the filing record, which meant it existed in a form that could not be revised or managed away once the conversation happened. I called Renata on Thursday evening and told her where things stood. She said, "Are you going to tell him in person?" "Yes," I said. "Do you want me there?" I thought about that. Not as a body for moral support, Renata was not the kind of person who functioned as a body for moral support, but as a person who had been saying just noticed the timing for 2 years and had been right, and who deserved to be in the room when what she had been right about was finally named. "Yes," I said. "I want you there." She drove up from Richmond on Saturday morning and we had coffee on the porch the way we sometimes did when she visited, the particular comfortable quiet of a father and daughter who do not always need to fill the space between them. At 10 o'clock I called Robert. He answered quickly, which told me he was still monitoring my calls. I said there was something I needed to talk to him about and I asked if he could come to Charlottesville that afternoon. He said of course. He arrived at 2. He came into the living room and saw Renata and his face did the specific thing that faces do when someone appears who was not in the plan, a small involuntary recalibration, a reset of expectations. He hugged her. She hugged him back, the controlled warmth of a woman who is doing something correctly rather than doing something she currently feels. We sat in the living room. Renata in Francis's wingback by the window. Robert on the sofa. Me in the chair across from him, the one I had been sitting in for 23 years. I said, "Robert, I am not going to co-sign the loan." He opened his mouth. "I am not finished," I said. "I'm not going to co-sign it because I heard you on Saturday night through the wall of the guest room. I heard all of it. He'll sign. He always does. The account numbers are already drafted. The rest into our name." The room was very quiet. "I also found the contractor authorization form from August," I said. "The back of it. The financial coordination authorization that you directed me to sign without telling me it was there." Robert looked at the floor. "I know about Collier Property Management LLC," I said. "I know it was registered in July with Denise as the registered agent. I know about the September letter to my brokerage. I know about the account that was opened in Roanoke in August." I paused. "My attorney filed protective orders on all of my accounts on Thursday. The LLC registration has been challenged on the basis of the fraudulent contractor authorization. The full sequence is documented and filed." Robert was very still. The still of a man who has heard his own architecture described back to him by the person he built it around. "Dad," he said. "I am not finished," I said again, not unkindly. "I want you to understand something before you respond. I'm not telling you this to destroy you. I am telling you this because you used a word about me on Saturday night that I need to address. You said he always does. You said it about me. As though 23 years of my saying yes to you was a property of mine that you could count on rather than a choice I made because I loved you and believed the choice was honest." I paused. "He always does is what you say about a mechanism. Not about a father." Robert put his hands on his knees and looked at them. "He always does is not accurate anymore," I said. "I want you to know that, not as a threat, as information. The information is that I am 66 years old and I have been paying attention for a long time and I am paying attention now more carefully than I have ever paid attention, and the pattern you built your plan around does not work the way you thought it did." Renata said from the wingback quietly, "Robert." She named her daughter Frances. Robert looked at his sister. "Your daughter is Frances," Renata said. "You did that because you are not only the man who drafted those account numbers. You are also the man who named his daughter after his grandmother because he understood what that meant. I need you to sit in the room with both of those things right now rather than just the one." Robert was quiet for a long time. The October afternoon was going through the living room windows, and Charlottesville in October does something particular with late afternoon light that has never failed to be worth looking at, and I looked at it while my son sat with what he was sitting with, and I let the room be what it needed to be. Finally Robert said, "I am in trouble." "I know," I said. "The Roanoke project," he said. "It is real. The loan is real. But the project is behind and I have a personal guarantee on an earlier phase that I cannot meet, and I needed the cosign to get the construction loan to get the project moving, and I needed the rest because I thought if I could get ahead of it before it became visible to anyone I could make it right before anyone knew." "How long has this been building?" I said. 2 years, he said. "Maybe 2.5. Renata exhaled slowly from the wingback. Not in anger. In the specific long exhale of someone who has been waiting 2 years for a number to be said out loud. The LLC, I said. Was that your idea or Denise's? Both, he said. She found the mechanism. I was the one who put your name in it. That is not something I can put on her. I looked at my son. Robert, I said. The account numbers. The contractor form. The LLC. Those things cannot be walked back legally. Jeffrey has filed what he has filed and it is on record. I paused. What can be walked back is what comes next. Whether you tell me the actual shape of the debt. Whether we address it honestly. Whether the next steps between you and me look like a father and a son who trust each other or look like two people managing around the filed paperwork. What does honest look like? He said. It looks like a number, I said. The real one. Not the managed version. And then it looks like you and me and Jeffrey sitting at a table and figuring out what is actually available and what the terms are and what the conditions are, because if there is help available for the real situation, that help looks very different from what you were building toward through a contractor form. You told me the number. The actual one, not the cosign amount but the personal guarantee exposure and the project deficit and the total of what 2.5 years of managing around a problem rather than naming it had accumulated. It was a large number. It was not an impossible number. Renata got out a notebook. Because Renata has always been the person who gets out a notebook when the problem has been named and needs to be organized, which she got from Francis, and which is the most useful quality a person can have in a room where something needs to be sorted out. We sat in that living room until 6:30. We did not solve everything that afternoon. Some things do not get solved in an afternoon. What we did was put the real numbers on the table and look at them without managing them, which is a different thing from solving them but is the necessary thing that has to happen before solving is possible. I called Jeffrey on Monday morning and told him I wanted to come in to discuss what a legitimate loan structure between a father and a son would look like, documented and filed as part of the estate record so that it was part of the accurate picture rather than outside it. Jeffrey said he had handled those before and knew exactly how to structure them and to come in Tuesday. The LLC dissolution was finalized 3 weeks later. The protective orders on my accounts remained in place, revised to allow for the specific transactions Jeffrey and I had agreed to within the loan structure, and nothing else. The contractor authorization was revoked from the brokerage record. The September letter was documented in Jeffrey's file as evidence of the misrepresentation, which is where it will stay. The estate documents were revised with the same care I had come to expect from the process, accurate rather than angry, reflecting what I actually wanted rather than what any external pressure had been pointed at. Renata's position did not change because Renata's position had always reflected the relationship accurately. Robert's position was adjusted to reflect the loan as an advance against his share, documented and tracked, so that the eventual distribution would be honest rather than distorted by what had happened in the unrecorded space. He always does is not how I describe myself. What I do now is pay attention. What I do now is read the backs of forms and call Jeffrey when something feels off and notice the timing the way Renata told me to notice it. What I do now is love my children in the specific way that includes saying no when no is the honest answer, and asking for the real number rather than the managed one, and sitting in living rooms in October with the light coming through the windows until the thing that needs to be said has been said all the way to the bottom of it. Robert called the following Sunday. Not about the loan. Just to call. He asked how I was doing and I said I was doing well and asked about Frances, his daughter, and he told me she had finished her Virginia history project and gotten an excellent grade and was very proud of herself. I told him I was very proud of her too. He said he was sorry and I said I know, and there was a silence that had weight to it but not the bad kind, the kind that comes after something heavy has been set down and the room is adjusting to the change. Dad, he said before we hung up. Yes, I said. I am not going to be the kind of father that Frances grows up explaining, he said. I sat in the chair in my living room and looked at the October light through the window. No, I said. You are not. We hung up. I went to water Frances's plants, the ones she had left that I had managed to keep alive across 4 years of paying the kind of attention to them that she had always paid, imperfectly but consistently, which she had always said was the only kind of attention that counted in the long run. Imperfectly but consistently. That is how you do most things that matter. That is how you keep what is worth keeping. If this story stayed with you, drop a comment and tell me which moment changed something for you. Hit that like button. Subscribe if you are not already here and I will see you in the next one. And if you have been the person who always does, let this be the thing that tells you that always is not a fixed property. It is a choice. And choices can change. Pay attention. Read the backs of forms. And the next time someone tells you he always does, make sure that he is not you. True Family Story uploads every week. Subscribe and hit the bell so you never miss one.